What if I told you the most powerful force in the galaxy doesn't rule with armies or laws? The Bene Gesserit shows us how real power works through centuries of patient manipulation, weaving themselves into bloodlines, religions, and even prophecies. They never take the throne, yet they shape empires. This isn't just fiction. The same tactics are used in our world by elites who control from the shadows. Want to know how? Keep watching. The hidden law of indirect control. The Bene Gesserit never sit on thrones. They don't lead armies or sign decrees, yet their influence stretches across generations. This is the hidden law of indirect control. Power flows through unseen channels. Look at modern corporations. The real power often lies with the board members you have never heard of, not the flashy CEO giving speeches. Or in politics, where advisors and lobbyists shape decisions while politicians take the heat. History shows this pattern repeats. The Medici family controlled Renaissance Europe through banking networks and marriages, not crowns. Today, tech founders maintain influence long after stepping down as CEOs. Think of how Steve Jobs' vision still guides Apple. Direct authority has limits. Leaders who rely solely on titles find their power brittle. Command too openly and you create resentment. The Bene Gesserit understand this. They plan ideas, not flags. Psychologists call this the principle of narrative control. Robert Cialdini's research shows people comply more readily when they believe an idea is their own. The Bene Gesserit's voice technique demonstrates this perfectly. It's not mind control, but suggestion phrased as irresistible logic. They frame choices so their preferred outcome feels irresistible. In our world, advertisers and politicians use the same tactics. They don't force you to buy or vote. They shape how you see the options. Here's the first pillar of indirect control. Whoever controls the narrative controls reality. When the Bene Gesserit manipulate prophecies, they are not lying. They are selectively emphasizing truths that serve their goals. Modern examples abound. Media framing decides which news stories matter. Corporate PR turns crises into opportunities. Even social media algorithms quietly dictate what millions consider important daily. This explains why the most effective leaders rarely give orders. Instead, they craft environments where others arrive at their own conclusions. The lesson: influence isn't about being the loudest voice, it's about designing the conversation. Next, we'll see how these same principles apply to belief systems, where control becomes even more potent. Because when you don't just shape opinions, but entire worldviews, that's when indirect control becomes unstoppable. Third, manufacturing belief systems. Paul Atreides doesn't invent a new religion on Arrakis, he hijacks one that already exists. The Bene Gesserit planted prophecies centuries earlier, and Paul simply steps into the role they prepared. This is the second pillar of power. Belief systems outperform brute force every time. People willingly die for ideas they think are theirs. That's why the Freemen embrace Paul as their messiah. Their existing faith made them susceptible to his leadership. History proves this works outside fiction. The Johnstone massacre shows how dangerous manufactured beliefs become once unleashed. Jim Jones didn't start by demanding mass suicide. He built loyalty through gradual indoctrination, communal rituals, and isolating followers from contrary ideas. Modern examples are less extreme but equally effective. Social media algorithms shape worldviews by feeding users content that reinforces their biases. Political campaigns don't just present policies, they frame issues as moral battles, triggering tribal loyalty. Anthropology explains why this works. Rituals create group cohesion faster than logical arguments ever could. The Freeman's water sharing ceremonies bind them tighter than any contract. In our world, corporations use similar tactics. Think of Apple's product launch events or Amazon's leadership principles recited like mantras. Shared rituals make people feel part of something larger, and that feeling is more persuasive than facts. Here's the mechanism. Control meaning and you control behavior. The Bene Gesserit didn't need armies because they controlled how the Freemen interpreted reality. Paul's victory wasn't just military, it was psychological. He framed the fight against Harkonnens as a holy war, turning survival into destiny. Modern leaders use the same playbook. Effective messaging ties actions to core values. A climate activist doesn't just argue about carbon levels, they invoke saving future generations. Politicians don't debate tax rates, they talk about fairness or freedom. The key is ethical framing, sacred triggers. Words or symbols tied to deep belief can unite people without manipulation. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't invent the idea of equality. He connected it to biblical imagery his audience already revered. The lesson? Don't create belief systems from scratch. Find existing values and align your message with them. This builds loyalty that coercion never could. But belief alone isn't enough. To maintain power, you need to control over something far more tangible. The resources people can't live without. The Freemen had rituals, but they also had spice. And when scarcity enters the equation, influence becomes absolute. The spice must flow. The Freemen understood something the Harkonnens never did. Control the resource everyone needs, and you control their future. Spice isn't just a drug in Dune. It enables interstellar travel, extends life, and fuels the entire galactic economy. Without it, civilization collapses. This mirrors our world. Semiconductors power everything from phones to military tech. Lithium batteries drive the green energy transition, and cloud storage holds the digital infrastructure of modern life. Control these and you dictate the rules. The Harkonnen approach, brute force monopoly, always backfires. By holding spies through violence, they created enemies at every level. The same pattern plays out in real resource wars. China's dominance in rare earth minerals gives it leverage in trade disputes, but it also motivates rivals to develop their own supplies. Game theorist Thomas Killing showed why this happens. When one player controls a critical resource, others will inevitably work to break that control. The third pillar of power isn't just owning resources, it's making yourself indispensable. The Freemen didn't just harvest spice, they mastered the desert environment nobody else could survive. Their knowledge of sandworm behavior and water conservation made them the only ones who could reliably extract malaj. Translate this to business. Tesla didn't just build electric cars, they created charging network and battery tech others depend on. Guerrilla tactics simplify resource control. The Freemen used their train to bleed the Harkonnens dry, attacking supply lines and disappearing into the dunes. Modern parallels, small tech startups often outmaneuver giants by dominating niche markets. Think Slack revolutionizing workplace communication while Microsoft struggled to catch up. The lesson: when you're weaker in resources, excel in expertise, but reliance on a single resource is dangerous. The Imperium's addiction to spice left it vulnerable to Paul's rebellion. Today, Taiwan produces 90% of advanced semiconductors, a geopolitical flashpoint. The Freemen survived because they diversified. Spies granted leverage, but their real power came from controlling water. The takeaway: build systems where you're irreplaceable, but never stake everything on one advantage. This leads to the final paradox of power. What happens when the Messiah you created becomes the tyrant you can't control? Paul's rise shows how charismatic leadership can turn against even its architects. The Messiah trap. Paul Atreides becomes the Freeman's Messiah, but that's where his problems begin. His charisma unites the desert tribes, yet it also traps him in a system that can't function without him. This is the Messiah trap, when a leader's personal appeal becomes their movement's greatest weakness. Compare Paul to his son Leto II. Paul relies on blind devotion, while Leto builds systems that endure beyond any single ruler. One creates followers, the other creates a legacy. Look at Apple after Steve Jobs versus Tim Cook. Jobs' cult of personality drove innovation, but left the company vulnerable when he was gone. Cook's less flashy leadership stabilized Apple by institutionalizing processes. The same pattern appears in politics. Leaders who rely on charisma often leave chaos when they fall. Their systems collapse because they were built on loyalty to a person, not principles. Organizational psychology explains why this happens. Charisma bypasses critical thinking. Followers stop questioning and simply obey. The Freemen call Paul and follow him into holy war without considering the consequences. In business, founders often struggle to delegate because teams won't challenge their ideas. This creates brittle organizations. Research shows companies with strong succession plans outperform those dependent on star CEOs by 15% over a decade. The Bene Gesserit avoid this trap entirely. They design influence to last centuries, not just one lifetime. Their breeding program isn't about creating a perfect leader, it's about controlling the conditions that produce leaders. They embed their agenda in religion, education, and genetics. Modern parallels exist. Warren Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway to thrive regardless of who's CEO. The solution: build frameworks that outlive you. Document processes, train successors, distribute authority. Paul's fatal flaw wasn't his vision, it was failing to make the Freemen self-sufficient. The Bene Gesserit succeed because they are gardeners, not statues. They plant ideas that grow on their own. Now consider how these principles, narrative control, belief shaping, resource dominance, and institutional design combine into something greater. Because true power isn't taking control, it's making sure the game keeps playing your way long after you're gone. Next video we'll cover. Just kidding, you already know what to do next. Start with one pillar, then build the rest. The Bene Gesserit don't fight for thrones, they shape empires over millennia. While others chase temporary power, they plant seeds that outlast dynasties. Every leader wants control, but real influence works through systems, not force. Narrative, belief, resources. These are the pillars that outlive regions and revolutions. The question isn't whether you can seize power today, but whether you can design what comes next. So start with one lever, control the story people tell, shape what they value, or master what they need. But remember, the slowest moves win the longest games. Thanks for watching.